The idea of putting on a stiff collar and tie every day and catching the early train to London to work in an office appalled me. I plucked up the courage. I had already made up my mind, and that bolstered me. I had plans of my own. "I'd like to be an actor," I said. "Be an actor?" my father said. "Good God, you can't even speak!" But I was determined that my stammer, as well as my father's opposition, could be overcome. This exchange with his father gave him the motivation to excel in his acting career, which lasted for well over 40 years. Although an impressive run, this man had seen and been through so much, whether they were good, bad, tragic, humble, or even shocking as he found himself. In the end, he would tell you that no matter the risk and cost of such endeavors, he certainly came out being luckier than most. This is the story of David Tomlinson.
Hey everyone, welcome to another book review. And in this one, we're going to be covering Luckier Than Most.
Luckier Than Most is an autobiography of British actor David Tomlinson. He was known for films such as Carry On Admiral, Three Men in a Boat, Quiet Wedding, and of course his iconic role as George Banks in Disney's Mary Poppins. Even with that, Tomlinson himself was something of an enigma, despite appearing in 2 more Disney films. Apparently Tomlinson thought that as well and came up with his book, since he rarely gave any interviews after he retired. Of course, you have countless amount of autobiography books of celebrities talking about their upbringings, how they became this and that, pretty self-explanatory. However, this one is different as this is about someone we know less about and we wish we knew more of, but got distracted by other lives of celebrities. I mean, what's new about Kim Kardashian that hasn't already become common knowledge? What makes this book different is that there was little to nothing on Tomlinson's background prior to this. He never liked being interviewed as he seemed a bit intimidated by them. Thus, there was very few, and I mean very few, interviews Tomlinson did, even after he retired. In fact, the only TV appearance that can be found of Tomlinson was from 1992. However, he didn't talk too much about his career as it mostly focused on comedian Simon Day, who's pretty obscure himself. However, Tomlinson did confirm this.
Did you, in Sound of Music, you had a moustache? I think I'm right
in
to
the
say.
Sound of Music, darling.
Were you ever?
Back to the book, it starts with Tomlinson's childhood and how he developed a passion for the art of theater, overcoming how shy he was. He was never fond of just being a normal Englishman as his father, C.S. Arthur, thought he should have been. Speaking of his father, David had an interesting relationship with C.S., despite him not matching the status quo of what a father should be. It's interesting how he still cared about him even with the secret C.S. kept from David and everyone for the longest time. While I won't give it away, I will hint that there is a reason why David's father suggested that he should adopt a stage name for his acting career. He also talked about his military service in the Royal Air Force during World War II, from being stationed in Canada to crashing his plane in his own backyard. There was a separate article written about that incident, but it never really got into detail of how it happened. Fortunately, Tomlinson clarifies this really well. Another curious piece was that Tomlinson was married twice and neither of them ended in divorce, which gives you an idea of how genuine of a person he was. His first wife, as David explained, succumbed to depression and as a result committed suicide, while his second wife, Audrey, stayed with him until his death. This was something that was not known before this book, and you can imagine the hardship Tomlinson went through during this time. Getting away from the depressing aspect, Tomlinson goes into depth about films he was in, most of which obscure, such as Castle in the Air, Three Men in a Boat, and Up the Creek. Along with these films, Tomlinson also describes his relationships with people he worked with, such as Laurence Olivier, Dylan Johns, and the original Pink Panther, Peter Sellers, who Tomlinson talks of the most.
And there's a bunch of stuff that wasn't known until Tomlinson came out with his book, such as how close he was in landing the lead role in Disney's 1961 film The Absent-Minded Professor, or how disastrous of a film production the fiendish plot of Dr. Fu Manchu was. All that is good, and he describes pretty much all of his experience on each film he's done. Except for one particular film he doesn't go much in depth with, and one can assume which film that may be. Hint, hint.
With a big name like Mary Poppins on his resume, you would think that Tomlinson would spend a chapter or two talking about his experience on the set and in general. After all, the cover of the book literally has a portrait of him as the character of George Banks, the central character of the film. Surprisingly, Tomlinson makes very little mention of the film itself. The things he does mention can also be found in at least 2 other articles, such as his concerns on the film's budget, saying the film would be lucky to break even, and his meeting with Walt Disney and his wife Lily, talking about dwarves. Not much mention of the other actors, the songs, the filming crew, his afterthoughts, the director, or even how he dealt with Dick Van Dyke's flawless British accent. One critical topic Tomlinson brings up in his book is autism. This is because his son William developed much differently as a child than his brothers. Both David and Audrey had to go through countless moments when William would act and react abnormally, such as violent tantrums, lack of eye contact, little speech, and obsessive behavior. Specialists in the early days believed he was deaf, but David and Audrey were convinced that it was something else. They eventually discovered that it was autism. It's very interesting that David takes all of the information given to him really well, since he never dealt with something like this before. A lot of people in those days would brush it off as though it was not their problem and feel embarrassment for having a child with such a disorder. For Tomlinson, like with many loving parents, he never passed judgment. He and Audrey supported and helped William with his condition in every way possible, because that's what parents should do for their autistic child, as well as love them no matter what. And that's what David did. This hits me home since I'm autistic myself, and by the time I reached the end of the book, I was in tears seeing the results that came from David and Audrey's love and support for William, and his father couldn't be any prouder. Even though he doesn't delve much into Mary Poppins or the other Disney films he was in, David tells a very compelling story of his life filled with big opportunities, shocking revelations, tragedy, love and compassion for entertainment, and humble moments. There are 2 things about this book that might bug some people. David spells words differently than what people are used to, depending on which country you live in. Terms such as labor and organization are spelled alright since this is UK spelling, and since David is British, it makes sense, right? He also fits at least 3 topics in each chapter. This normally could be seen as too confusing and all over the place. Thankfully, Tomlinson ties them together really well for a consistent progression.
So yeah, Luckier Than Most is a must-read, especially for those that enjoyed watching Mary Poppins and just want more information on the actors that were in that film, or for those that watch Tomlinson's other films, or if they're just curious about the guy himself. Though I must warn you, getting a copy of this book will not be easy.
If you live in the UK, particularly in England, you won't have much trouble picking up a copy. But for the rest of the world, it involves more than just going to a bookstore. It's unknown if this book ever got an international release, and seeing how some words are spelled differently, it's unlikely that it ever did. Unless you get lucky with a seller in your home country, expect to pay a lot to import a copy. If you do see a copy of the book and it goes for less than $20, don't pass it by.
So thank you all for watching, and until next time, I will see you later.